Okay, welcome everybody, and many thanks, Rachel, Xavier, and Masataka for inviting me. It's a pleasure to maybe review a bit about reviewing ISMIR papers, and I want to present you some more personal thoughts also on this process and long-term experience. Just to better understand my perspective, I want to quickly introduce myself so that you understand in which fields I have worked. So originally, I studied mathematics, pure mathematics at the University of Bonn. I then moved to theoretical computer science, actually computer algebra, where I did my PhD. This was somehow already connected to efficient algorithms and the FFT. That's how I entered signal processing and information retrieval, where I did another degree called Habilitation. That's the qualifying exam or degree for becoming a professor. And after a postdoc in a computer graphics lab, I finally moved to the audio labs here in Erlangen, becoming a professor for semantic audio processing with a focus on music information retrieval. So I've seen quite a number of different communities and disciplines, and but ISMIR is, so to say, my family community. Let's say my mother community in some way. I wrote my first paper for ISMIR as a co-author, as the third or fourth author in 2003. So that is roughly 20 years ago. I was a scientific program chair in 2012 and 2015. So I can understand Rachel, Xavier, and Masataka quite well about what is going on in the background. I've been a member of the ISMIR board for 12 years until last year, and I was also the president for the last 2 years. Having said that ISMIR is my mother community, I also have, so to say, some fathers. So I'm still quite active in the IEEE community, in particular because of the audio processing and ICASP. And I'm also active within ACM. So that's, so to say, the computer science organization in some way. Let me just recall what or how music information retrieval may be described. So when you look at the ISMIR website, you find an explanation, something like MIR is the research of computational systems to help humans understand music-related data. And as you all know, MIR is a multifaceted area drawing from a diverse set of disciplines, ranging from technical disciplines, machine learning, engineering, information retrieval, to library sciences. Actually, the community ISMIR originated from in some way, up to, of course, musicology, music perception, psychology, neurosciences, and so on and so forth. So the list is much longer. And what makes ISMIR special is that we all share our interest in music and technology. So we all love music and we all love technology and the combination of these two things. We are an independent, I would say, still young and vibrant community. I mean, now 22 years old. I think what makes ISMIR very special that we try at least to support the next generation of scientists. So I would say, I don't know if everyone agrees, but I would say that we have an equal focus on research and education. So there's no research without education and vice versa. No good education without getting involved into research. And doing so, we also encourage interdisciplinarity and diversity on all levels. Not only diversity in terms of gender and geographic location, but also having different disciplines involved, different perspectives, and so on. And finally, we all support open access, reproducibility, and so on. I think this is important to keep in mind also when writing an ISMIR paper or reviewing an ISMIR paper. The ISMIR conference is a yearly conference. Again, it's open access to all articles. That's very special. That has always been like that from its beginnings on. So the copyright stays with the authors. The conference itself has increased quite dramatically over the last 2-3 years, in particular, when we became a virtual conference or a hybrid conference this year, with 200 to 500 participants with an increasing number. However, the number of accepted papers has been quite stable. It always has been something like 100 to 120 papers. Also, the number of submissions is quite stable, leading to an acceptance rate of 40 to 50%. And as for me, the most important point of ISMIR is the place where you get the best feedback for your work on MIR. And ISMIR is where you meet people who know and love MIR. So if you are doing research in MIR, ISMIR is and should be the place to go and to publish. Now, as for the review process, it has been quite hierarchical since its beginnings. And let's say in the last 10 years, we have had the following system. We have the scientific program chairs. So this year it's Masataka, Rafael, Xavier, and Rachel. And the role of the scientific program chairs is to organize the review process. This is quite some work, administrative work, non-scientific work. It's management work, more or less. Then the program chairs have to make the final decisions. This is a binary decision, unfortunately. So accept or reject, there's nothing in between. And they have to compile and balance out the scientific program. Then below, we have the meta reviewers who help selecting reviewers, make suggestions. They themselves review papers, so they act as usual reviewers. They lead the discussion phase and provide a summary of the discussion phase and of all the reviews and make a preliminary decision. And then, of course, it's also you, all the reviewers. That's the most important part, and also in terms of numbers. You review the papers and participate in the discussion phase. So in general words, what should a review achieve? There are different roles of what a review should achieve. So first of all, we should help the scientific program chairs making a fair and transparent decision. Help them making this binary decision at the end. And also the reviewers should help meta reviewers, so to say, preparing this decision, making a balanced recommendation. Most helpful for doing so is if the reviewers work out the strengths and the weaknesses of a paper explicitly. Another just as important role of a review is to give authors feedback on their work. So giving feedback is not only happening when your paper is getting accepted and you finally present your work at the conference. The feedback already takes place at the review level. So if you are a good reviewer, you should give honest feedback to the authors on their work, even if the paper is getting rejected. And so the reviews should help authors to improve their work. And last but not least, reviewing papers is also a way to support and shape the ISMIR community. So when reviewing and discussing papers internally, that's the point where we decide what we consider good scientific work or not so good or not fitting scientific work for ISMIR. So possible evaluation criteria, and that's also fixed in many documents, especially the review guidelines on the ISMIR website and also the review form. So let me quickly go through these points to make then some more personal comments. So evaluation criteria are appropriateness of topic. So does the paper fit into the scope of ISMIR? And this changes over years. So the scope of ISMIR papers has changed quite a bit over the last 20 years or so. Then it should be scientific and technically sound, a paper. So is the notation good? Is the math correct? Are the concepts somehow convincing? The work should be reproducible and should be understandable. Paper organization is important. So the essential points of a work should be clearly stated. Is there a clear take-home message? The paper should have some stimulation potential. I mean, it should not be boring, in other words. Yeah. So the paper should trigger exciting discussions. And last but not least, the paper should be novel and relevant. So it should have some substantial contributions and should give insights. Now, these recommendations are not really useful if you just say, yeah, the paper should give substantial insights and should provide insights, because that is not really well defined. What is a contribution? What is an insight? And this has been and is an ongoing discussion within the community. So maybe at this point, let me reflect a bit about what a contribution may be, what an insight may be. And actually, this is a general issue which may be present in all fields of applied sciences. Something I would call a research cycle in applied sciences. So typically, you may start with an application. An application could be, for example, a recommendation system, or let's say a running app where music should be recommended that fits to the tempo of running and should automatically adapt the beats of the music to your running cycle, so to say. This leads to a task referred to, for example, as beat tracking or tempo estimation. So that's a typical MRR task. Now, when you want to solve a task, you need to model your task. And this typically goes along with simplifying assumptions, simplifications. So in beat tracking, you may say, okay, in my model, beats are assumed to go along with note onsets. May not be valid for certain types of music when you think of syncopes or so, but that's a fair model assumption. The beats are somehow periodic is a typical model assumption. And maybe the tempo is somehow locally, at least locally constant to some degree. That are all simplifications. This should be made explicit. Then after modeling, you may invent or come up with a computational approach. Saying, okay, I model the onsets, I compute them using spectral flux, and I use, or maybe a deep learning method to compute activation functions. I do some periodicity analysis using autocorrelation whatsoever. Now, that's not all. You have to implement your computational approach using a programming language. And implementing things also, your algorithm should be maybe efficient. So you need an efficient implementation. And then you need data and annotations to train and test your approach. For that, you may need evaluation measures that are somehow meaningful. You need to do experiments. And then at the end, typically your things do not work as you thought. So you rethink your application, the relevance of your experiments, the task, the modeling, and so on and so forth. So this is really tricky. Applied research is really tricky because there are so many steps involved and they depend on each other. So when you do applied sciences, it's a blessing and it's a curse. And the same, of course, holds for ISMIR. On the positive side, it's a blessing because you can make contributions in so many ways. You can come up with a novel application or a novel task. You can come up with a novel computational approach. Maybe you build on an existing approach, but come up with a much more faster implementation. You may do new experiments on novel data sets and annotations. Maybe you come up with a novel evaluation measure. Maybe you reflect on existing results in a novel way. So the good news is a problem is hardly ever solved. And so there are many ways you can contribute with something. Wow, cool. That's how you get an ISMIR paper accepted in so many ways. Now, on the downside, you never solve a problem completely. You are always missing some aspects. Your modeling always goes along with simplifications. So your work is always vulnerable and disputable. So reviewers always find a reason to reject your paper. It's always possible to reject a paper in applied sciences. Now, to make things even worse, we are working in an interdisciplinary area. And again, there's a blessing and a curse going along with it. So on the positive side, you can make contributions coming from various disciplines. Maybe you love information retrieval and search for music. That's you come from information retrieval. Or you like the cool audio representations or music representations applying signal processing methods. You may have an application in musicology or in library science. You come up with a cool interface like Masataka is always doing, coming with fancy interfaces, and that's a cool contribution in MIR. Or apply machine learning in a novel way, or even improve machine learning. So you can contribute with novel collaborative work. Cool. That's how an ISMIR paper is getting accepted. Again, there's a downside because there are many different perspectives on your work. People coming from a technical perspective may say, you know, the application may be fancy or new, but there's no technical novelty. Oh, CNNs have been applied for many years now, reject. Or you come up with a music perspective and say, I don't care about the deep learning. The musical application does not make sense to me, reject. Or data perspective, you have not used all the 20 different data sets in your beat tracker, so reject because of that. So you will never do justice to all disciplines. Your work is always vulnerable and disputable. Okay. And last but not least, ISMIR itself has its blessing and curse. And one of the main reasons is that we really try not only to do research, we really try to educate the next generation of researchers. We want to give young researchers a platform to present their work. So we really try to support young researchers. Of course, we also need to balance out topics and approaches. One reason why the acceptance rate is between 40 and 50%, which I would consider relatively high, is that we want to give younger researchers a chance to present their work. So we have discussed these issues over the last 20 years again and again. Oh, let's decrease the acceptance rates to 20 or 30%. So we are comparable to ACM Multimedia, which only accepts 20%, blah, blah, blah. So having 40 to 50% is a choice. It's a choice of the community to give younger researchers and maybe papers that maybe are not completely ready, still a chance to be accepted and presented at ISMIR. Doing so, we really try to have an open exchange of ideas. So I feel ISMIR being really a society of friends rather than of enemies. That's not at all, the same in other communities. So I feel that we have a cooperative environment where we take a positive view on papers and want to accept papers as the default. Now, of course, the downside is when we include young authors and also young people at all levels, we also want young reviewers. They have less experience. So many people in the ISMIR community have little experience as authors and reviewers. That's one, but not the only reason we get inconsistent reviews. So very often I get much better reviews from newcomers than from the old guys. Yeah, it very much depends. Also, let's be honest, the paper quality is quite mixed within ISMIR. I mean, there's really excellent work, but there's also quite some problematic work. Yeah, and I think we are not too strict about this. So I would say paper quality is mixed. Then, of course, there's also pressure. I mean, you need to do a PhD, and this is based on publications. So you want to get promotion. So you need to get a publication out. And that, of course, creates a competitive environment. Many reasons to reject a paper, thinking, I better give low grades as a reviewer. This increases maybe the possibility or the probability that my own paper is getting accepted. Having said this, I have to say that when I review a paper, I have to keep reminding myself of the following points. I want to go through some points to finish up this kind of stimulus talk or presentation. So the most important thing is that you should show at all times, you should show respect to the authors. Show that you care and appreciate an article, a publication. Authors typically have worked hard. And if you find the paper poor, it's not because the authors are bad people. They have worked hard, maybe they could not do better, or they are missing the feedback. Always stay positive and assume good faith. Very important, be clear and direct. So don't be nice, but always be encouraging and never criticize authors, but always criticize the work. So never say something like, oh, the authors should have done much better, could have done much better. Yeah. Rather say, the work may be improved by considering the following issues or points. Yeah. It makes a huge difference how you phrase your critique. Be detailed and specific. Short reviews are hardly useful. I would even say short reviews are even harmful. So a bad review is even worse than having no review. If I get a review like, I like the paper and I think it should be accepted, 5, it's useless. This review is useless. Or if you say this paper offers no technical novelty and should be rejected, point. It's useless, it's harmful. So your review should help the authors to get feedback, to improve their papers. It should help meta reviewers to make an informed decision, and the program chairs and editors. For this, you need to justify the score in detail. You do not need to write about all aspects of the paper, but you need to give a detailed justification of your final score. You don't get, that's another point, you should not get lost in details. So it's not your role to fix the paper, to fix typos, even though this may be nice for authors. In particular, it's not your role to rewrite the paper, yeah? But you need to justify your score. Doing so, you need to make your perspective explicit. You may mention your background even in the review. Yeah? For example, you may start your review by saying, my background is in music sciences, and I look at the paper from a musicological perspective. Yeah? Or you may say, in the following, I want to comment on the paper from a technical perspective. Saying this, it's very helpful to avoid misunderstandings at all levels. Be honest, because MRR is so multifaceted. Every one of us, yeah, is a learner in almost all areas. Even when you have lots of experience, I'm sometimes missing the musicological knowledge to really understand the paper. And so you should never write something in your review you are not sure of. Yeah, just make an intelligent guessing, or just write something you think other reviewers also may consider a weakness. Don't do that. Better admit when you are lost. You can say, okay, section 3.1, it's too technical. I was not really familiar with the transformer and the Wasserstein distance. I cannot comment on this. I cannot say if it's correct or not. I simply didn't understand. However, as for the application, I think this is quite interesting and could make a valuable contribution, blah, blah, blah. So if you don't understand, just make this explicit and comment on this meta level, so to say. Take a clear position. That's in particular helpful for the meta reviewers and for the scientific program chairs at the end. So use the whole spectrum of evaluation scores. When you find the paper really cool and outstanding, even though there may be some minor flaws or some minor points, maybe evaluation was not done on all the existing data sets, but it has a really cool loss function, yeah, then give the paper the highest score and give an argument. If you think the paper is really bad, give it the lowest score, but always give a convincing support for your recommendation. Actively participate. So first of all, read guidelines and examples. And we come to this point in a second when we go through some resources. Participate in the discussion phase, yeah, which is, so to say, happening after the review. If you are unsure, especially as maybe a beginner, ask for help. Yeah, you can ask, for example, your PhD supervisor, or you can just ask your meta reviewer, or just send an email to the program chairs or to the editor if there's a journal. They are happy to help you. Working with you, collaborating with you as a reviewer at this point makes the work for them later on much easier. So it's a good investment even for the program chairs to discuss issues beforehand. Better cancel in time than be sloppy. So in my perspective, dealing with poor reviews is an editor's worst job. Better have no review than a poor review. And be reliable and responsive. So chasing after reviewers, I think, is an editor's second worst job. We really hate that. So if you don't have time because you're just overworked, that's no issue. We all understand this. Just say in time, yeah, okay, I have to cancel. Yeah, please drop me. Please try to find other reviewers. That's fine. That's completely okay. But let us know, or the scientific program chairs, let them know in time. So on my last slides to say, I want to summarize why you may want to become or why you are a reviewer. Reviewing is much more than coming up with a final decision. So first of all, hopefully, being a reviewer, you read some interesting articles. You learn about new research trends as the first person, maybe. You get to know the other side. So most of you are authors at the same time. So doing a review, you will reflect on your own work, hopefully, and on the way you write up things, yeah? Because you develop expectations as a reviewer, what you would expect as a reader. And you have to write this up in your review. And last but not least, being a reviewer, you can give something back to the community. Yeah, I mean, you have obtained probably many reviews in the past, and being a reviewer, you give something back, you become part of the community, you also educate already the next generation of researchers. And with this, I want to jump to some literature and links. And maybe the most important information, I mean, there's some cool blogs from last year by Blair and Jordan. They have done some overview and a very cool summary on insights on the ISMIR reviewing experience from different perspectives. There is some cool examples from Tom Collins, which he collected in 2015 and commenting, so to say, comparing different reviews. There are reviewer guidelines on the ISMIR list, and there's a very cool review form available now, overworked by Rachel, Xavier, and Masataka. So please carefully read the review forms.